ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول كل بدعة ضلالة.
Sheikh Jamal al-Harithi, he said that by the usage of the term for the whole of the Islamic societies that they are upon jahiliya, ala al-itlaq, then this is takfir of the Islamic societies. This is takfir of Islamic societies, to say that all of the Islamic societies today, that they are in jahiliya. They are in a state of jahiliya. What was the state of jahiliya? This was the state of kufr and shirk, paganism and idolatry, without revelation and without guidance. So to say that the Muslim ummah today, or the Islamic societies today in the world, that they are in a state of jahiliyyah, that is to make takfir. And this is something that is oft repeated by Sayyid Qutb, who was, of course, a leading figurehead of Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin. He was possibly their foremost sheikh in terms of knowledge and scholarship, as they saw it. So in his books, he makes mention often of this issue of jahiliyyah and the ummah being in a state of jahiliyyah without restriction at all. So then he presents some of those. And I'm not going to mention all of them, but I'll mention some of them to you. Otherwise, because he actually does mention several. So Sayyid Qutb mentions in his book, Ma'alim Fit Tariq, on page 101. Just to note that when we first started practicing, many of us, in the late 80s and the very early 80s, this is one of the first books that was handed to us to read. So they would say, this book, you have to read it. It was called Milestones by Sayyid Qutb. I said, why? I said, because it talks about the social issues and the political issues of our times. It was written, of course, even decades before that. It was written in the 50s and 60s, Ma'alim Fit Tariq. And it deals, it's a book filled with huge amounts of emotion and agitation, and talks about the social structure and the political structure of the world and various societies, focusing upon Egypt, but it is general in reality to all Islamic societies. And if a person doesn't know what he's reading, he's easily duped into following the ideas of Sayyid Qutb. So what does he say, Sayyid Qutb, in this book? He says that the atmosphere of the society of ignorance has entered these societies that call themselves Muslim. These societies have not entered this circumstance of jahiliyyah because of the fact that they believe in a deity besides Allah, no. Nor because they put forth symbols of worship besides Allah either. They entered the state of jahiliyyah because they do not practice the worship for Allah alone in their laws, in hakimiyya, in their laws, or in their nizam. And this affair, regardless if they don't believe in a deity besides Allah, it is the most specific of affairs in directing worship towards other than Allah. So they do not believe in the hakimiyya. He mentions that they do not believe and they reject the hakimiyya. That is not by Allah, or they believe in the rule that is not the rule of Allah. So the meaning that they believe in secular laws or other laws that are not the laws of Allah. And when this is applied, then the Islamic view of these societies of jahiliyyah, all of them are designated a single designation. Their claim to be Islamic is rejected. All of them. And their claim of being upon any Sharia. So, you see his point. That regardless of the fact that you worship Allah alone and you do not associate partners with Him is irrelevant. The fact that these societies do not judge by that which Allah has revealed, they are societies of jahiliya. He mentions also Sayyid Qutb in another one of his works, Al-Adalatul Ijtima'iyya, page 250. He said, when we examine the world, all of it today, in light of divine determination in understanding the religion of Islam, we do not see that this religion is present. Allahu Akbar. The presence of the religion stopped when this recent body or this body of Muslims, this recent body of Muslims failed to single out Allah alone with hakimiyya, with Allah's laws in the life of a human being. So Islam ceased to exist because these rulers in these countries don't judge by Allah's law. So Islam does not exist in the world today according to Sayyid Qutb. He said elsewhere, في ظلال القرآن, in his so-called commentary of the Quran, in the shade of the Quran, he's called it volume 2, 157, he said, indeed this era that we are living in has gone full circle, as if the deen has only now come to the people. The people have returned to the state they were in when the Quran was first revealed to Allah's messenger. It has gone full circle in time, like the society to which this deen came to. Like the society to which this deen came to with the kalima La ilaha illallah. Mankind, he said, artad, that they have faqad artad or artaddat al-bashariyah, that the mankind, that they have apostated to the worship of the creation and the tyranny and injustice of the other religions, and they have withdrawn from the kalima La ilaha illallah. Who's that? All of the ummah. This is Sayyid Qutb. Now the point is that these ideas are actually prevalent today. But the thing is, when they're made in lectures and you know, by these people on their podiums and in their khutub and in their lectures and in their conferences, and when you see them on YouTube, as many of the people, you know, when they clickbait and they just think, well, let me just listen to this guy. The root of it is coming from the ideas of these types of people. The likes of Qutb and Mawdudi and Al-Banna and Muhammad Surur and Hassan al-Turabi and these types of people. But you don't know it. You just think that they're talking a good talk, because it sounds eloquent and it sounds real. It's true. Look what the rulers are doing. Look what they're doing in their countries. Look at their concerts and look at the musicians that go to them. And look at the festivities that they partake in. This is what that speaker was saying on YouTube the other day. That's what people say. But where's it coming from? It's coming from this. That foundations were laid in the early part of the 20th century. Of course, the ideas of the Khawarij have always been present. But they were codified and laid down and written into books and articles, mixed with the ideas of the likes of Lenin and Marx, and Alexis Carrel and others from the Western philosophers and communists and socialists. They took the word barbarism that was used in Europe by the Western European philosophers, and then they brought it into the Arabic language and they said, this is the jahiliya that we're talking about, barbarism. We are living in a state of barbarism, a state that predates revelation. There is no order. There is no law of God. There is no civilization that exists anymore. So all these people did, especially Sayyid Qutb, that they, because you know Sayyid Qutb, of course he's a famous Ikhwani, but he lived some of his time in the United States of America. In America, he went there and he got confused about Islam altogether, and he doubted that he was even a Muslim. He went around churches listening to the sermonizers of the priests. And then he learned how to ring church bells. Then he thought to himself, no, this ain't right. Went back to Egypt, and he went to the other extreme. And he became an extreme Khariji who decided now that he was going to write a commentary on the Quran that would save the Muslims from their dire state. So then he looked at the Quran and he looked at the hadith of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam through one vision. And that is the vision of revolution, of Marxism, looking at the world in terms of its socio-political, its socio-political environment or its state. So when he looked at any of the Sahaba who were mistaken and he went against the ideas that he was upon, he would attack the Sahaba. That's why he accused the likes of Amr ibn al-As and Muawiyah of ghish, of trickery and deception. That's why he accused Uthman bin Affan that his khilafah is irrelevant and we don't consider it to be valid. We ignore it. We just take it from Abu Bakr and Umar, ignore Uthman and go straight to Ali. Why? Because he was weak, decrepit, and he took money from the Baytul Mal. He looked at Musa alayhi salam and how he was a leader over Bani Israel. And he said, what kind of example is that of a leader? Impetuous, getting angry at every turn. As soon as he gets angry, he does something. What kind of leader is this? This is Sayyid Qutb. Because now the lens has changed. We're not talking about the tafsir of the Quran, tafsir of Quran bil Quran, tafsir of the Quran bil Sunnah, tafsir of the Quran bi aqwal al-Sahaba, tafsir of the Quran by the language of the early Arabs, in the language of revelation. No. Now we're looking at the Quran through the eyes of political ascendancy and an end goal, communism. So he read Lenin, he read Marx, he read Alexis Carrel. He took it word for word and brought it into the Arabic language in his tafsir and his discussion upon Islamic revival. Word for word. Even the Western commentators say that he's basically plagiarized Lenin. And Lenin was the revolutionary behind the Bolshevik revolution of Russia that brought in the USSR. After which began the Cold War between the East and the West. That was Lenin. And then you had the rest of the leaders such as Trotsky and Stalin up until the downfall of the communist Russian state in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Sayyid Qutb took his teachings from them. Safar al-Hawali, Salman al-Auda would look at the uprisings that were taking place in China, and they would say, look at those brave revolutionaries standing up to the state of communism in China. These people are influenced by things that are outside of Islam and the text of Islam. Then they try to impose it upon Islam. So now barbarism or jahiliya would make sense to Qutb, because it's a good vehicle for him. If the whole of the Islamic world was in a state of jahiliya, we can bring down everyone. We can bring down the rulers. We can bring down the ruled, whoever supports them. Yusuf al-Qaradawi himself, their leader who died the other day, and their great scholar of the age. If there's anyone that is greater than Yusuf al-Qaradawi in Ikhwan al-Muslimin, it's Sayyid Qutb. Because Sayyid Qutb is the asl. Before Sayyid Qutb, the founder, Hassan al-Banna. But Sayyid Qutb shadows, Qaradawi is in the shadow of Sayyid Qutb in terms of who they regard to be their great leader of Ikhwan. It's Hassan al-Banna and Qutb. After that comes everybody else. But look what Qaradawi himself, in a moment of self-reflection, says about Sayyid Qutb. He says in his priorities of the Islamic movement, priorities of the Islamic movement, page 110. He said, it was in this period that the books of Sayyid Qutb appeared that represent his final ideas, where he exhibited takfir of whole societies and waging a destructive war against the whole of mankind. This is Qardawi talking about his own Sheikh Qutb. Both of them, of course, Egyptians that were highly influenced by what was happening in the environment in Egypt in their youth. Another leader of Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Sayyid Abdul-Wa, he is one of their murshids, one of their guides. He stated in his book, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun fi Mizan al-Haq. The Islamic Brotherhood, or the Islamic, the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, in the scales of truth. Page 115, he said, the ideas of takfir arose and spread amongst the youth at the end of the 1950s and the early 1960s. They were affected by the thoughts and writings of Sayyid Qutb. They took from that, meaning from his writings and thoughts, that the society as a whole is in jahiliya, and that he had made takfir of the rulers who had refused the hakimiyya of Allah by not ruling with that which Allah had revealed, and the takfir of the citizens of the land when they became satisfied with their rulers. They themselves admit this remains present in the age that we are living, my brothers and sisters. When you hear people talking with these types of language, the language of demonstrations, marching, rising up against the ruler, speaking against the rulers, they are not judging by Allah's revealed. This is just like jahiliya of old. Even if they don't realize it, this is something that emanates from the likes of Qutb, Banna, Maududi, and their offshoots in the 20th century. The likes of Muhammad Qutb, the younger brother of Sayyid Qutb, he was arrested after the execution of Sayyid Qutb back in 65 or 66. Was he 65, 66? One of the two. Sayyid Qutb was arrested. They say he was tortured. Possibly he was, because it was a very difficult era in the time of the rule of Jamal Abdel Nasser, the leader of Egypt, when he called to pan-Arabian nationalism. So it was a difficult time for the Muslims in that era. But Sayyid Qutb, he called for a vanguard that would arise and defend. And they would be plucked out from the echelons, the higher echelons of society, a general from an army, a political leader here, and he would pull them out, and they would be the ones standing forth to establish this new Islamic era. So Sayyid Qutb was arrested for incitement, even though he was part of the revolution that brought Jamal Abdel Nasser into power and made him the leader of Egypt. He was part of the movement that put him in. Then the leadership turned against him and imprisoned him. So he wrote, and he preached, and he spoke, and he agitated, and he made takfir. He said even the mu'adhin from the minarets, all of those mu'adhins are kuffar. He said they are kuffar. The imams in the masajid, they are unbelievers. There is no prayer in these masajid because they have been employed by the ruler. So he mentioned these affairs because he truly believed that we were living in a time of jahiliyyah as if the Quran had not been sent down. And he says it clearly as I've quoted from him. So he had a younger brother, Muhammad Qutb, who was his protege. Muhammad Qutb gets arrested after the execution of Sayyid Qutb. So Sayyid Qutb is tried in court. He's tortured in prison. Then he's tried in court and they execute him. Then they imprison Muhammad Qutb. And they imprison all of the heads of Ikhwan al-Muslimin and their preachers and agitators. Saudi Arabia, at that time, a country of Tawheed and Sunnah. Scholars are active. The schools and madaris and universities are teaching the people Kitab, Sunnah, Kitab al-Tawheed, the teachings of Muhammad bin Abdul-Wa and the teachings of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah were paramount throughout the whole of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, especially these two great scholars. That was the thing. That was their curriculum. Muhammad bin Abdul-Wahhab, Ibn Taymiyyah. Because their books were widespread, easy to understand. Kitab al-Tawheed, Usul al-Thalatha, Qawaid al-Arba, Usul al-Sitta, Wasitiyya, Tadmuriyya. Ibn Taymiyyah on the issue of how to deal with the various groups and parties. They loved it. But Saudi, at that stage, they look at what's happening in Egypt and they see the imprisonment of Muslims. So Saudi intervenes and intercedes for those Muslims that are in prison in Egypt. So they say, release them. They said, but these are agitators. They said, release them, we'll take them. Because we're a Muslim country, maybe they'll be more comfortable living in the kingdom. So what does Saudi do? Lets them in. Egypt releases them, Saudi accepts them. Thinking in an Islamic environment, with a Muslim ruler, with Sharia law, with the scholars here. None of you are scholars, because Ikhwan Muslimin, there's no scholars amongst them. Right? They're just political agitators. They just know how to tell the people to go and march in the street and they just wave the flag of Hakimiyya, but they don't know the first thing about it. However, at least in Saudi, you've got nothing to complain about. So what does Saudi do? Brings them in. Muhammad Qutb is one of them. They say, what do you know? He says, well, I was a teacher and I can teach. So he enters a school. Then he enters a college. Then he teaches at a university. He becomes a leading lecturer in an Islamic university in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And others similar to him. So now these people come into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and they take positions of teaching. Now they start teaching the youth in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So from the prominent teachers of Safar al-Hawali, the Sheikh of the awakening, as they call him, the Sahwa, he studies under Muhammad Qutb. He writes a book, Zahiratul Irja fi Fikr al-Islami, the rise of Irja in Islamic thought. Muhammad Qutb writes the introduction for him, reads it through, advises him, puts it out. In this book, he accuses Shaykh al-Albani of being a murji, like the Irja of Jahm bin Safwan. Who writes it? The Muqaddimah, Muhammad Qutb. They start attacking. These are the students of these Ikhwan that were given shelter in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They start agitating. When do they start? They came out at the beginning of the first Gulf War. This is 1989, 1990, 1991. There were others who graduated from the Islamic University, some of them also Egyptian. Abdul Rahman Abdul Khaliq, Ikhwani agitator, from Misr, from Egypt, gets a place in the Islamic University. He bumps into Shaykh al-Albani. Shaykh al-Albani becomes his teacher at the Islamic University of Medina. Who's present? Shaykh Rabi is also at the university at the same time. Who else? Muqbil is there. And others are there. Abdul Rahman Abdul Khaliq is there. So Shaykh al-Albani said, I recognized that he was an Ikhwani. So I gave him da'wah. And I gave him da'wah and he accepted Salafiyya. He graduated and then he left. To Egypt? No. Where? Kuwait. In Kuwait he joins up with a group, Jam'iyyat Ihya al-Turath al-Islami. This group becomes a multi-million-dollar organization doing work all over the world in da'wah and charity work. From India to Malaysia, Indonesia, Africa, Sudan, Yemen, Britain, France, Sweden, US, Canada. Why? Because this is Kuwaiti money. They go to Sheikh Muqbil and they say, if you work with us, we'll give you some money. He goes, take your dinars and go back to Kuwait. Sent them back because he knows who they are. And then he does some durus and lectures warning against this Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq, who they made as their leader in religious affairs. This Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq lives in Kuwait, died not long ago, a few years ago he died. This Abdurrahman Abdul Khaliq joins up with these other agitators in their understanding and their fikr. So they come up with the idea of Tawheedul Hakimiyya as a fourth category. They come up with the idea that every group of agitation works upon the borders of Islam. So Hizb ut-Tahrir have a role, Jamaatul Jihad have a role, Ikhwan al-Muslimin have a role, these have a role, those have a role. Each of them are to be left to propagate Islam and give da'wah in their way, and we ignore our differences. Why? Because the greatest threat right now is that Islam is not under, or the Muslim countries are not under Muslim rulership. So they organize marches, demonstrations in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Sheikh bin Baz, Sheikh Rabi, Sheikh Muhammad Aman Jami refutes them in the early 90s. Sheikh Rabi begins to refute them. These are the two main. That's where they come from in the beginning. They go to Sheikh bin Baz to complain about Sheikh Rabi and Muhammad Aman Jami. With Sheikh Rabi are some of the other scholars who were younger than them at that time. Sheikh Ubaid and others. Ali Nasir al-Faqihi and others. So they go to Sheikh bin Baz complaining. Then Sheikh Rabi and the Mashayikh, they send the watha'iq, the evidences to Sheikh bin Baz and Sheikh ibn Uthaymeen and Sheikh al-Albani. All of us, over a small period of time, all of these scholars coalesce. And they refute these followers of Qutb and the ideology of Qutb as one hand. So Sheikh Rabi refutes Sayyid Qutb, Sheikh bin Baz, Sheikh al-Albani, Sheikh ibn Uthaymeen, Sheikh Muqbil, Sheikh Rabi', Sheikh Ahmed al-Najmi, Sheikh Zayd al-Madkhali. 45 or more scholars bring their refutations. Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, Ali Nasir al-Faqihi and others start refuting the Qutbi dawah in the kingdom. But it's beginning to take off in Kuwait, in the Gulf countries and elsewhere. The ideas of Sayyid Qutb are spreading. That these scholars, that these Muslim rulers today, that they have changed, they have made tabdeel, istibdal. They have exchanged the Sharia for secular laws. So implicit in that is that the Muslim rulers are kuffar. Out of that comes the various terrorist movements that begin to rear their ugly head. Osama bin Laden and his group, Al-Qaeda. So then you see bombs going off before 9/11 in the Muslim countries, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in other places. So these movements begin to come. After 9/11, they just proliferated. This is the ideology of Qutb. This is the ideology of Qutb. And this is why we say, my brothers and sisters, that it is important that we understand the roots of where these people are coming from. The term jahiliya, when you think, well, it's jahiliya, a lot of people are jahil. It's true, a lot of people are juhal, they're jahil. That's true. But we are not in a state of jahiliya. And we are not in a state when the ummah is ghaiba, because that was another term that they used to use. There's no ummah. The ummah doesn't exist anymore. Ummatun ghaiba. This is an absent ummah, which is also takfir. So understand that when you hear these people talking in the manner that they talk today, and you think, well, it's just an ignorant man, he doesn't really understand. Actually, the roots are very, very devised. So this is what Muhammad Qutb did. You know what some of the others did? After the death of Sayyid Qutb, they went to hide in caves outside of Cairo. Because they said, all of them are kuffar, the whole of the world, except for us. So they actually went to caves outside of Egypt, hiding in caves. They would come out kill some police officers, kill some soldiers, kill politicians, and run back to the caves. There is a whole catalogue of terrorist acts that took place from about after the death of Sayyid Qutb, give it about a year or two, when they got organized and some of them got released. In the late 1960s, early 1970s, this minister was shot dead. His wife and his children, they're blown up in their car. Blow up a museum, killing 20 people. This was actually taking place in the early 70s in Egypt, after the death of Sayyid Qutb. In 1982, one of them on a parade, he's a soldier for the Egyptian army, on parade. His name was Istanbuli. Anwar Sadat, like they do when they do these military parades, and they march in front of their leadership, and the whole of the road is, and all of the people are there watching the military of Egypt as they're showing their tanks and their vehicles and their weapons and their surface-to-air missiles. So Egypt did that. And a lot of these countries, they do it. Anwar Sadat is there with his family. Him, his wife, the generals, the ministers, this Istanbuli, Ikhwani, takfiri, Qutbi, raised upon the ideas of Sayyid Qutb, he opens fire. Look at the khiyana. Opens fire and kills Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, in the early 1980s. You're thinking about 9/11. This thing began decades before that. And it came to us when we started practicing Salafiyah in the early 90s, late 80s. And it was strong. So he shot him. You know what he said? He said, I've killed the Pharaoh. Just like Abdurrahman ibn Miljam. Of course, we don't compare the two victims. Ali is Imam, Khalifa, radiyallahu anhu, promised Jannah. Anwar Sadat, there is no such guarantee for him. However, he was using the same rhetoric, the same type of language. I'm fearless. I've just killed the Pharaoh. These are these people. You think it started yesterday with 9/11. This is something that is generational. Started with the Khawarij and the killing of Ali radiallahu anhu, and it has not ceased. Maybe we're in a bit of a quiet period, if you want to call it that. Allahu a'lam. But these things and these realities are the realities that Shaykh Al-Fawzan, hafidhahullah ta'ala, and the scholars, they know. They know. And that's why the books of Aqidah are filled with refutations against these types of people. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khairan. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.